Hey guys, a handful of you have asked me a very obvious and pertinent question, which is, why is this group called Hidden Kings? Now, this name actually comes from bringing together two different concepts, but I think that they're both extremely important. So the first one comes from a book called Iron John, and it also addresses a handful of topics that come from other mythology and other sources as well. But it comes from the concept of there being three kings in every man's life. The first king when you're born is your father. When you're a child, your father could literally decide whether you live or die. Your father could, in historical times, have left you on the side of the road or side of the trail, chosen not to feed you. And so we as men, or as boys rather, as we're growing up, we seek to serve our father because he is quite literally the most powerful being in our world, even more powerful typically than our mother. And so that's the first king. And many men never move beyond that. So many men live their entire lives seeking to make their father proud, working to serve their father. Now, for many men, there comes a second king. And this second king is someone who's not your father. So historically, it may have been a village elder. It may have been somebody else that maybe you were apprenticing under, if it was, slightly older times. Today, that may be someone who's a football coach that you had, could be a teacher, could be someone that you look up to who's your age, or in some cases even younger. But in today's world, we also have other ways of representing that second king, and that could be accumulation of money, Facebook likes, all sorts of different things that represent the respect and acceptance of others. Lastly, then, the third king is self, and it's stepping into kinghood yourself as a man. Now, what's often misunderstood here, because in the first and second king, oftentimes what we're doing is we're gratifying the other individual really for the sake of just their own gratification. We serve our father because we want to make our father proud of us, not because he necessarily represents any high ideal or because he is a pathway to God or higher spirituality or anything like that. And oftentimes that's the case with our second king, although it is possible to use a second king as a conduit to a higher level. So maybe that's a priest, maybe that's just somebody who's really tapped into something that's greater or bigger than themselves. But when we step into third king ourself, what we're doing is we're actually putting a higher power, a higher reason for living above our own. And this is extremely important because it's not having people who serve you, it is having people who, through you, serve a higher power. So, of course, we can talk about shamans or priests or rabbis or whomever that clearly represent a connection to something higher or more spiritual. But then there's other examples, and one of my favorites is I remember listening to a podcast about a guy who lived somewhere in East Texas, and he had dedicated his life to fixing vintage vacuum cleaners, and he had so dedicated his life that people came from all over the world to bring him their busted old vintage vacuum cleaners, and people would come to him to learn also how to fix these vacuum cleaners. So what this guy had done is he had dedicated himself so completely to these vintage vacuum cleaners that he then became a conduit for other people to really service the same goal. And we could get into the spiritual side of this and what dedicating yourself to something like vacuum cleaners really means, but for the purpose of this conversation right now, it's knowing that being king does not mean that people serve you, but that people serve a higher power through you. So if you want to see an example of what this looks like, you can find some old video of the moment when Queen Elizabeth was crowned. And when Queen Elizabeth was crowned, the moment that the crown gets set on her head is hidden from all human eyes, because that is the moment where she ceases to be human and becomes the country, in this case Britain's conduit to God, the direct connection to God. And that's really no different than what we're talking about here. Now, it may not be God, it may be some other higher power, but I think it's incredibly important to keep in mind here. Now, moving on, and this is obviously something that we could spend years talking about, but why is this called not third king and hidden kings instead? Now, the hidden portion comes from another book, the Tao Te Ching, written by Lao Tzu. Again, this is a book that we could spend a lifetime of study on, and it's greatly misunderstood. But I'm going to read from this book, chapter 13, verse 17, which addresses different types of rulers or kings. So the beginning of this verse goes, "The highest type of ruler is one of whose existence the people are barely aware. Next comes one whom they love and praise. Next comes one whom they fear. Next comes one whom they despise and defy." So again, the highest type of ruler is one of whose existence the people are barely aware. That's where the hidden kings portion of this comes from. It's learning that by leading, by stepping into our kinghood, we don't have to govern, we don't have to lord over other people. If we're really doing our jobs well, people won't even really recognize that we ourselves have stepped into kinghood, because that's not why we do it. We do it to effectuate positive change in this world. And so I challenge you guys to think about it in this way. I know a lot of the people in this group are entrepreneurs. Many of us think that as entrepreneurs, we need to command a certain amount of power, whether that's through influence, whether that's through money. But in reality, that's all actually stepping away from the highest form of leadership that we can take, according to the Tao, which I truly believe is one of the greatest leadership handbooks that you can possibly pick up. Because remember, let me read these first few lines again. The highest type of ruler is one of whose existence the people are barely aware. Below that, next comes one whom they love and praise. Most of us want to be that guy. We want to be the one who's loved and praised. Some of us even want to be the level below that, one who's feared. But I'm challenging each and every one of you to live up to the highest ideal of a ruler, highest ideal of a king, and be the type of king of whose existence the people are barely aware. A teacher of mine once told me that reaching enlightenment is like growing up to be a redwood in the forest. The redwood is completely unaware of the shade it provides for the people on the ground. Yet the people on the ground love the redwood for its shade. The redwood's just being a redwood. Yet the people love the protection, the shade, everything that redwood represents. So I challenge you guys, step up to this. Let's work together to step into our third kinghood together. Let's help those who are working to get there. Let's all work together so that we can all achieve this. Let's bring other people into this circle, into this conversation. And I know that it's not going to be easy. I know that all of us have been facing our own challenges. And I welcome you guys to, in the comments below, let's discuss this. If you agree, disagree, whatever it might be, this is a cause that's incredibly near and dear to my heart. And I welcome each and every one of you to step into this journey with me. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for watching this. And welcome to Hidden Kings.